Hi, this is UseWise channel, and I'm Adriana Baranek, CEO of Miadria. I'm joined here with Mladen Baranek.
Hi.
He's our CTO, and today we will be talking about identity management and especially identity management in the cloud, with special mention of Google and Microsoft cloud identity management. So, can you please tell us a little bit about what identity management is? What is its role within organizations and how it used to be handled in the past?
Mhm. So the most important part of IT infrastructure is identity management that enables authentication. Basically, users can log into their devices, and they can access applications according to their username and permissions granted to them. So historically, most companies were relying on Microsoft Active Directory that came into existence as a derivative work of X500 international standard and lightweight directory access protocol. A lot of companies prior to introducing Windows 10 had only Active Directories on premise, and they would enroll their notebooks and desktops into Active Directory, create users, and grant permissions on that service. Usually, applications would also rely on such a service, and now with the internet and with mobile devices, with applications in cloud, there was a huge problem. So this identity management became more complex. And for example, Google, they started with identity services that were included in G Suite. So you were suddenly able to log into your mobile devices, into public cloud applications. Of course, on the internet, you must take care of security. So Google was spearheading with two-step authentication, various forms of key management like this FIDO key management, and Microsoft had a problem what to do with this whole mobile world. So they introduced something called Azure Active Directory that enables new companies to start from scratch. So they can, for example, buy Office 365. They will get Azure Active Directory as part of the bundle, and they will be able to authenticate their Windows 10 PCs and all cloud-based applications using only Azure Active Directory. Of course, if they have legacy services and legacy operating systems like Windows 7, then things become more complicated, and they still need one form or the other of on-prem Active Directory. So basically, identity services enable companies to establish a list of users, usernames and passwords, and grant permissions to users or groups of users to access devices or applications.
Yeah, so you were talking about Azure Active Directory as not having all the capabilities that Active Directory normally would have on premise. When we are talking about Active Directory, it is mostly something that was in the past used by larger organizations. So basically, the Office 365, including the Azure Active Directory, even though it does not have the full scale of capabilities, allowed companies to start using Active Directory from the very beginning.
So that whole Active Directory team developed for, I wouldn't say larger corporations. It was if you had more than 5 or 10 PCs, suddenly you would have a problem to be in a work group, and you would need centralized management of users.
In theory.
Yeah, but most companies with 10 or more devices or employees that are using IT services would go for Active Directory. Of course, it's not a must.
Okay, in
but,
theory.
But a lot of companies have Windows Server. So Microsoft used to have something called Small Business Server that was for companies of 25 and less employees that came bundled with Active Directory email and everything. Of course, that product is discontinued, and new companies today have really no reason to go with on-prem solution. There is much better way to go with either Azure Active Directory or Google Identity or some other cloud-based identity provider. And that's kind of a must if you need security on the internet.
When we are talking about the companies that already have established Active Directory on premise, they can also opt so that they, for instance, have just the Active Directory virtual machine on AWS or on Azure and run it there and use it as they would be using the on-premise installation. Is that correct?
Yes, that's one way of doing it. So for companies that have Active Directory on premise, there is one option of running Azure Active Directory in parallel with on-prem Active Directory, and that involves synchronization and some additional complexities to bundle both, to provide both on-prem and internet authentication. There is an option to use Azure Active Directory services. So basically you can have Office 365. You can create your users for Office 365, and for legacy devices and for legacy applications you can activate directory services in Azure that will take over your users, so it will be much easier to use because customers don't need to manage that whole thing. It comes as a managed service with coupled with Azure Active Directory. Of course, if you are using Google Identity, then there is additional capability that when you create users in Google Identity, you can automatically assign licenses from Office 365, and you can also have a lot of public cloud applications immediately integrated with Google Identity, like with Azure Active Directory. So if you have Salesforce or Zoho or some other, even AWS, you can basically use the same username and password as you would use for your G Suite or for your Office 365.
That is really cool. So we hear often from our customers this misconception that they have to have the Office 365, for instance, to be using Dynamics. So basically they can be using Google Identity with Microsoft Dynamics, and Google Identity will be their identity management.
Yes.
That is possible. And regarding the pricing, how the Google and Microsoft compare with regard to the pricing of identity management?
Microsoft is coming from this on-prem world where they have a lot of SKUs. So you get some plain vanilla kind of free Active Directory. Then you have some basic Azure Active Directory that you get when you buy Office 365, and you have to pay for additional security for things like two-step authentication. So you can assign specific features to some or all of your customers, but you have to pay for those models. Google has much simpler structure, so you get if you go with Google Cloud Platform or G Suite, you get a certain amount of free identities, like 50 or something. Then you have if you are a G Suite user, you get, of course, for every user one identity, plus you get some bonus identities that you can leverage, and you can buy additional identities. I think it's around $4 US per identity. For example, for companies that have a lot of mobile devices that need only management of Android devices, that would be preferred way of doing it by providing one identity to every device.
Yeah, and when we are talking about the on-premise Active Directory, you can have some users that are created in Active Directory, but that do not in fact have any device or any computer or anything. They can just be created as users. That would be like a way of managing your human resources. For instance, when you have a new employee, you just put them in, and maybe they're working in the factory, and they don't need any devices. They don't have any devices. But when we are talking about the identity in the cloud, then this is just a little digression. But what we see is that some companies do not buy, for instance, email for all employees. Can you please comment on that a little bit?
Okay, so you can have more users in Azure Active Directory or Google Identity service than you have email accounts.
Yes.
And you can even configure it to use third-party free of charge email services from other companies or some other public cloud services. So it can be used by human resources to actually track all employees within the company, even externals. And as I said, you don't have to assign licenses to all of identities in your service.
Yes, but having an email would be recommended.
Yes, so if you would like to communicate with your employees, if you would like to have a kind of basic HR processes like I don't know, sick leave notifications or processes for travel expenses or things like that that most employees have to fill in, like shift planning, and then it would really make sense to have all employees in your identity service, and then you can have your whole organization represented with organizational units with specific persons in charge of dealing with departments or other organizational units.
Yeah, and one topic that is adjacent but not really the same, the topic of the single sign-on. Can you draw us a line between this topic and the single sign-on topic?
Historically, enterprises and bigger companies have huge issues with security and with using a lot of applications that required different credentials. So even if a company would have SAP, in some cases they would have a special username and password for SAP, special username and password for their PC, special username and password for their workforce management system, for, I don't know, some inventory management system. That creates chaos for users, plus IT services then mostly around providing correct usernames and resetting passwords for your employees. So in a lot of cases, companies opted to have single sign-on, in a sense that you would use either Active Directory or some other directory service for logging into all of the applications that your employees are using. Of course, if you are using public cloud applications, then Active Directory does not support needed protocols, and it's not really secure enough to be used on the public internet. So you have to move towards either Azure Active Directory or Google Identity or some other identity service provider to enable your users to have one username and password that can be used for cloud applications like Salesforce or SAP in cloud, and your devices and on-prem applications.
So basically, the Google Cloud Identity or Microsoft Active Directory on Azure, they can be used as single sign-on if you are using modern services, if you are using modern stuff.
Even with the legacy stuff, then you have to do additional investment to support legacy applications, but it can be done that you have all your users created in Google Identity, and they're using passwords and login authentication process from Google, so you can rely on Google's security best practices and on their ability to execute this in public internet space.
Great. Yeah, so definitely this is a huge area. So basically we have been talking for quite some time now, but we could be talking for hours. Definitely this is a topic that is very important, because it's basically the thing that starts everything. If you want to start using any service on your computer, basically you have to be using some sort of identity management. And moving your identity management to the cloud in 2019 is a very good idea, definitely. It's not a good idea to have the on-premise Active Directory just boiling up there and creating lots of security issues and problems for you in the very near future.
Yes, so if you are starting now, it doesn't make sense to create vulnerabilities and complexities with on-prem Active Directory. It is much better and more efficient to go with either G Suite or Office 365 that comes bundled with Azure Active Directory and Identity Service. And as we said, you can extend it, so if there are some legacy applications that you would need to support, it is possible to do it also with new identity services.
But as well, you can be using, for instance, Google Cloud Identity without using G Suite.
Yes.
You can be using Google Cloud Identity with Office 365. You can be using Azure Active Directory with G Suite. Can you?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Also, yeah. So basically, this entire new world that is out there on the internet that public cloud is making possible for the companies is basically allowing them not to have the single vendor lock-in like they basically had in the past. In the past, Active Directory was the most common identity management, and it's not like companies really had any lots of choices. Okay, they had some choices, but not lots of them. And this is basically where this idea of UseWise is coming from. We will have also the UseWise and identity management sometime down the line in the very not so near future. Until then, we will be using Google Identity and Microsoft Identity on UseWise. And do you have anything else to add to our viewers?
Yeah, so we are open for questions. If you are contemplating migrating to a public cloud, or you need help with establishing infrastructure for new companies, we are here to help.
Yeah, and planning is very important in that regard. It is very important to know what you want, where are you going, and not just buy from somebody because they have like the great sales pitch. It is very important to have your own, to know your own users, to know your own needs, and to adjust the services in the cloud to you, and not have you being adjusted to them.
Yeah, but I would say most important thing is that it doesn't make sense to do investment in on-prem Active Directory. If you are starting now, it really only makes sense to go with Office 365 or G Suite. If you need some additional things, of course, we can help with that. As we said, with both Office 365 and G Suite, identity service comes bundled with your plan, and it can be extended and crafted to your needs further down the road.
Great. We would love to help you. If you have some questions, please ask us. We have started a new playlist with questions and answers, and we will be answering your best questions. Our questions are moderated because there are lots of spammers on internet, and we do not allow spam comments to appear below our videos. But if you have a nice question, if you have a question that really is important to you, please ask us, and we will try to make a video for it. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Thank you, Mladen, for taking your time to join me. Thank you. Bye.